All right, good morning and welcome to the House Environment Committee. This morning, we are looking at two amendments to S223 from Representative Page. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you said, I have two amendments. The first one, I was concerned when I read S223 that I was concerned that there wasn't representation from the organizations that serve on international bodies of water within Vermont. And there are currently 3 lakes in Vermont that fit that description. Obviously, the first one is Lake Champlain. Second is Lake Memphremagog, which is in my district. And the third one is Lake Wallace or Wallace Pond. And I just felt that even though the lake associations have representation, that these organizations that serve not only Vermont, but also serve and work with governments such as Quebec in Canada should be included. And you'll see that there are 4 individual organizations that are included that represent Lake Memphremagog and Lake Champlain. As far as I know, Lake Wallace does not have an organization that is affiliated with a watershed association. And Lake Memphremagog works in that area, and that they would fit, the Lake Memphremagog Watershed Association would fit that responsibility. But the Green Mountain Water Environment Association, it performs training on storm wastewater. It performs public education services. Memphremagog Watershed Association also does the same. It tries to improve water quality with remediation and restoration projects. And the Lake Champlain Citizens Advisory Committee also gathers data concerning the water, wildlife conditions in the Lake Champlain region, which again includes not just Vermont and Quebec, but also New York. So this amendment asks that there be additional organizations added to this study group.
Okay. Are you finished with this one, or do you?
I'm finished with it. I'm ready to go to the second one.
Okay. Actually, though, Bill. Okay, that's fine. Let's move on to the next one.
The second amendment applies to item 4, that it be deleted and replaced with an amendment that I think you all have. You'll see the replacement calls for greater clarity with the state regulations protecting our lakes and ponds. It also includes a statement related to threats from leaching of chemicals such as perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances to lakes and ponds from waste treatment facilities in the state. And I believe that, we can all agree that protecting and identifying threats to our lakes and ponds is essential for ensuring that water is safe for consumption. It also has economic benefits for our farmers and through tourism, and it provides habitat for our wildlife. And that's basically it for the second amendment.
Members have questions for Representative Page.
Just trying to understand, sorry.
Representative
Speaker, just trying to understand the actual wording differences between, on the second one here, between the original 4, subsection 4, and the new one.
Well, the second one adds the issue regarding PFOAs and PFOSs, and it directs it towards the areas of the leaching of chemicals from waste treatment plants. That's the big difference there.
seems like it adds the phrase provide regulatory certainty.
Yes, that is also,
We already have that.
That's the series of what had been in yours is reordered so that I could introduce that. And so the main components are the same, but that phrase about including PFOA and leachate, that is new.
Okay. Basically, the last, like lines 11, 12, and 13 that are the new wording. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully you'll stay in the room. We'll hear from legislative council now.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
Michael Grady with legislative council, which amendment would you like me to start with?
So I think it would be helpful to start with this second as presented by Representative Page, because I'm going to talk about the focus of the study.
So the focus of the study overall is the water quality of the state and addressing those 3 to 4 large subject matter that have questions about their implementation by the agency. And with regard to Representative Page's amendment, it's looking at whether or not the classification and the management of lakes and their water quality should be treated in a different way than other waters like rivers and streams, et cetera. Many other states do manage their lakes in a different way. So what Representative Page's amendment would do here was be to add that last phrase about in their evaluation of whether the existing water classifications for lakes should be different, that the group should look at threats from the leaching of chemicals such as perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances to lakes and ponds from waste treatment facilities in the state. But generally, I think when you're going to do a classification system, you're going to look at all uses in a watershed or in a lake area. So to an extent, the leaching from waste treatment facilities into any lake where that could occur would already be looked at during your classification. This is to specify that it must be in this review. And to an extent, I think this is due to the state and the feds not having a surface water quality standard for PFAS yet. And that raises questions about people know that it's leaching. People know that it's reaching water. People know that it's being discharged from wastewater treatment facilities, but there's no surface water standard for it. And I think that's what raises questions like Representative Page's amendment. Like, how do you look at the effect of PFAS on water quality and lake classification when you don't have a federal or state standard that you probably should?
And so that actually begs the question of how would this group look at this without the standard?
Well, one of the things that you directed, the General Assembly directed A&R to do in 2019 was to come up with the surface water standard for PFAS, and they have yet to do that. They did do everything else in that bill, but finding and determining a surface water standard for PFAS it's harder than it sounds.
So I understand that, like, the way the study was already set up, theoretically they would have dealt with this topic, but practically they probably wouldn't have, because
I think practically, I mean, if it's hard for me to say, because holistically, if you're looking at classification of lakes and you're looking at all of the things that are different for lakes and how some of these lakes are transboundary lakes and they have different concerns, they might have looked at this. They might have. I can't say for sure.
It's when I think about the way this anti-DEG work is focused, it really was more about our class A waters that have not been reclassified. And pretty sure Lake Champlain is not a class A water. Do you know if Lake Memphremagog is?
I can't say that every segment of Lake Memphremagog is not A, but I am reasonably certain that most of it is B.
Representative Page would agree with that statement that it's a B. Yeah, it's currently a B. It's a, do you know, it's B drinking water?
Yeah,
On the Canadian side, in Sherbrooke.
Yeah.
And there may be camps and homes that draw water from the lake as well.
which is allowed. It used to not be, but it is now.
Do members have further questions on this amendment? Representative Austin?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if in the process of evaluating existing water classification, if that standard would be required to have a standard in terms of PFAS and poly.
So classification is different from water quality standards. They have overlapping concerns, but it's two different tools. Classification is about like the water quality of your lake so that the uses around the lake and the uses of the lake can be managed to maintain that quality.
Excuse me, sorry.
And water quality is about what any particular activity, how it affects the lake. So if you were discharging from a waste treatment facility, whether or not there was PFOA in it, PFAS in it, and what the standard or tools would be to control it. So they do have, overlapping concerns, but they are different tools.
Thank you.
Representative Sakowicz.
Yeah, not so much a question as a comment, and that's just that we're covering in this section threats to waters, but this addition is which I think is extremely important, but it's also very, very specific. And it seems like if we want to include this specificity, then we ought to be including listing what are all the other threats that we ought to be having this committee look like. And it just seems it doesn't really fit in terms of being consistent with the types of things that we're asking the committee to do. And I would expect that that this group is going to look at all the things which are relevant for what they're gathering them for, and trust that they would do that.
I mean, you're accurate. There's a lot of stressors on lakes. It's not just leachate. It's not just PFAS. There's phosphorus. There's aquatic invasive species. There is just use. There's flow. There's eutrophication. There's a lot of stressors on lakes.
Representative Boyd.
So Mike, are you sort of saying that the bill as written, it would certainly allow them to look into this?
Would allow them to, yes.
So.
Doesn't require them.
But it could theoretically be covered if they're looking at threats to the quality of the waters in a lake. That seems like it'd be a fairly important one to look at.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. And it also may come into play in their review of anti-degradation because how is PFAS going to affect the uses of lakes and other waters going into the future? I don't know. It's may affect its ability for use as drinking water. And so I do think that it could come up there as part of anti-deg as well.
Representative Norris.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Given that there are not specific standards for PFAS, it might be, I think it's a good idea to include it as something we specifically want them to look at, because given that there's not a standard, probably be a good idea to make sure it gets included. And given also that it is a specific stressor in some particular areas, again, it sounds like it's a good idea to make sure that, granted, there's probably lots of other things that will be considered, many of which have standards. This one, since it doesn't, let's make sure it's, you gotta make sure it's included.
All right, the next amendment.
So the next amendment is Rep. Page noted, adds 2 members to the study group. So it would increase from 12 to 14 members. 1 would represent the MEP Association. 1 would represent the Lake Champlain Advisory Committee. This would add into JFO $2,100 to the budget, the appropriation necessary for the working group. In House Appropriations last week, JFO testified that the budget from the underlying bill could be assumed by the legislative appropriations. JFO basically said the same thing to me over the weekend. You could assume this into your budget. 12 to 14, $2,100 extra. The members are from the Memphremagog Watershed Association and the Lake Champlain Advisory Committee.
We're 14 members total if we accept this amendment. Representative Sackley.
Yeah, just getting back to the other amendment, I've just been thinking about what the implications might be of including this specific look at PFAS. And I guess I would wonder a little bit, I would worry a little bit that this study group is only going to meet for a limited amount of time, and they're going to come back to us with the report. If we're singling out this one particular area, as opposed to all the other threats for them to look at, it seems like we're at least implicitly telling them that this one is more important perhaps than the other ones. And we could end up skewing how they spend their limited amount of time on what really ought to be a broad look at threats. And so I really would feel in the bill the way it is and let the study group make those determinations. And that's, we're giving them this opportunity to get back to us, and they are the experts. And so it seems like we would really want them to take that broad look at what the threats are and prioritize them in the way that they think makes the most sense. I really just worry that we would be really influencing what they pay attention to in a way which might not give us the results that we want from this group. And
Representative White.
So Mike, so the S-223, it seems like we've got this committee here because we have waters that aren't properly classified, and we haven't, ANR hasn't implemented the anti-degradation rule despite the legislature telling them to in 2009, right? So it's pretty important we get that done. Are there current classifications or regulations about leachate and PFAS, like the waters, or is that where the surface water quality? I mean, there are other things, that.
There's standards for leachate, right? Leachate is itself a waste, and any discharge of waste to waters of the state has to be permitted. And to the extent that there is a standard for what's in the leachate, it has to be meeting that standard. What Vermont has done for the landfill is, because there is no standard for the PFAS and the leachate, it has basically established through an order, specific requirements for the management of that leachate at the landfill. And it originally was filtration before discharge, but now there's no discharge, and that has to be contained and managed also. Since it's not the only facility or prior facility where leachate might be an issue, but it's the only one that's still operational for purposes of managing its discharge to surface water. So that's how that's been handled. How they would handle, I mean, I think one of the questions is, if you look at Memphremagog and you say Memphremagog needs to be a higher classification, that it meets the standards for Class A, or it needs to be managed differently, because under this working group, you'd be looking at classifying lakes differently. I think there's a question about what is allowed, or how you manage that landfill facility, waste treatment facility, to maintain the water quality of that lake. It's really, it could get hyper specific pretty quickly. And I think the larger issue is setting a standard for PFAS. For me, I think that's a first step that hasn't been made.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me as a little ironic. Like, I guess I feel like, so in 2009, we said you need to have rules for anti-deg. And now in 2019, we told this administration, you need to have a surface water standard for PFAS. And now it's 2026. We don't have those things. And yet, the way you just described it, Memphremagog could benefit from this study as is, like every other lake. And I think having this, as Representative Saku had said, like, you could spend the whole 8 meetings, there's only 8 meetings of this group, talking about how to manage PFAS in surface water. We've asked the administration and the agency to do that. And this group is actually focused on a much broader scope of work with very limited time to do that work. Just sort of feel like, yeah. What is the role of an off-session legislative committee in the face of A&R not doing what we've asked them to do? Other questions for legislative council?
Well, I'm just,
Awesome.
this is more a statement I had brought up, putting on a member from the Lake Champlain Citizens Advisory Committee. You know, St. Albans Bay is one of the most degraded, parts of water in the lake. And if we were gonna include Memphremagog, I would hope that we would include Lake Champlain, which does have certain portions of it that are classic waters.
Other questions or comments before we get to other folks have interest in this? Representative Leo.
Thank you, Chair. I think for the benefit of society in general, you have to look at classification of lakes based upon the A, the B, C, whatever. Seymour Lake currently is B, but it meets the eligibility criteria to become an A. Therein lies the importance of reclassification, because our waters in Seymour go direct deposit to Echo Lake. Echo Lake has a petition in there to become reclassified to 1A. And when you look at the eligibility criteria, it's large, right down to turbidity and clarity, let alone chemical or eutrophication. They're strict. Since we already know it meets the criteria, I think adding the chemical families of the PFOAs and the PFAS is important. Not because we have standards yet, but to know where we are in those surface waters when standards are developed by DEC through ANR, whatever, we'll know whether we're out of sorts or well within sorts. That's my only comment.
Representative Sackwitz.
Yeah, I guess I would suggest that if we were to include the Memphremagog Watershed Association in our study group, that would be the voice in that group for PFAS and leachate concerns. I mean, they've obviously been so very focused on that issue that including them at this point would seem to be part of that message that we do want the study committee to, you know, give that part of the threats to the waters. That's something that we all also would like to see them at least look at. And so I think that is a pretty strong signal that we do want to consider that as part of what they do, without separating it out as a separate topic. I think that would really make sure that it did get its due.
Representative Austin.
Yeah, I would argue that if Memphremagog isn't considered, you know, as a member of this committee, then the Lake Champlain Citizens Advisory Committee being added as well, because of the degradation of some of our days, especially up north.
It is currently added in the amendment. It is listed.
I'd like to give a couple of other folks in the room who joined us. But if people don't have further questions for Michael. Jared Carpenter.
Shall I stay in the Chair Department Relations? So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee. I would, I'm not very familiar with the nuances of the whole PFAS leachate issue. I know that's separate. I think the PFAS obviously is a concern with water quality and water pollution. I do share the concerns that have been raised that it might, with only 8 meetings, the group might, if it's called out, there might be too much of a focus on it. So I would hesitate to include it the way it is in the Second Amendment. However, I think adding the folks from Lake Memphremagog and from the CAC as international waters members, as Representative Page suggested, would certainly hold the feet to the fire of the group generally to look at all of those issues. So it wouldn't be, I don't see how it would be bypassed anyways, but it would be included in the discussion. I mean, this is a reclassification bill to look more broadly at reclassifying waters, as Representative Labor suggested, of finding criteria where they move from B to A and identifying all the threats and the and how the reclassification process would work. And of course, steps forward into anti-degradation. So that might be including the members, but not specifically calling out PFAS might be a good way of splitting the issue, so to speak, to make sure PFAS are looked, but not specifically called out, if that makes any sense.
All right, any questions for Mr. Carpenter?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Ms. Rice, did you want to comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chris Rice from MMR here on behalf of Casella. We don't support Representative Page's amendment relative to the PFAS piece. You'll remember when the committee looked at H652 back in February, Sam Nicolai from Casella came in and talked about the technology that they are employing up the landfill to remove PFAS from the leachate, how they handle that, the exciting work that they're doing. And the concern with the amendment is by calling out specifically leaching chemicals and waste treatment, that somehow maligns or denigrates what they're doing up the landfill to do that important work. It seems like it's a significant expansion of what the study group is already tasked with doing. And I would say probably the better way to address the issue is through the water quality standards. I don't know where the current rewrite process for those standards is. That might be a question for the agency, but that seems to me to be the more appropriate standard rather than through the classification study process that you have currently before you in the anti-debt.
Members have questions? Thank you. Michael, can you help me understand when a new parameter gets a water quality standard, how does it then get rolled into the anti-degradation work? I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear your answer.
So the Federal Clean Water Act requires states to update their water quality standards every 3 to 4 years. Vermont's been on that schedule, a little delayed at time, but generally they've been keeping up with that requirement. When a new parameter is identified for management under the standards, it's added to the standards. How it's managed under the standards really depends on the parameter. If it's a chemical that might have specific effluent limitations. If those effluent limitations are not sufficient, they might have additional pretreatment requirements for that chemical. Then there would be standards for the presence of the chemical, the effluent in surface water, what would be acceptable. In this case, you're probably going to have to take into account background levels because it is present in the environment.
I'm having a hard time imagining, well, first of all, how would we even include them include PFAS chemicals without a standard? How would the committee even do that?
How would the committee address PFAS for purposes of classification?
Right, in an anti-degradation policy without a standard.
Well, what you'd have to go to what's basically called a narrative standard. So you wouldn't be working off of a technical standard, you'd be working off of the addition of the chemical. The parameter has affected the use of the water for one of the traditional uses. Likely in this case, drinking water. And therefore the use that is adding the parameter has to be managed to prevent the further degradation of that use. And so it's not technical, it's not scientific standard based, it's a narrative like how it is affecting the use of the water.
Right, but we do have a drinking water standard. And so all of a sudden the lake becomes the drinking water I mean, you would most likely default to that, I guess.
Well, that's right. There are 4 PFAS that are managed under the drinking water standard, maybe 6 now. They might have increased it to 6. I have to double check. So public water systems, public water supplies need to manage their water to those standards. I don't know if I answered your question in full.
I guess I'm just having a hard time imagining how they get folded in without a standard. I think they should be folded in. Of course, we know this is a concern. But I'm very concerned that we lose the larger framework we're trying to create here with this very giant specific addition to the scope of work.
Um, walk a line. I the attempt to establish a standard for PFAS in surface water has been both regional and national. Now has been involved in that effort. What is contributing to the delay is the identification of new sources fairly frequently, and the lack of information about all of the different types of chemicals that fit in this class. So how do you set a standard for something that you don't know exactly what it is or where it is? When it's identified, what do you do to control it? It's a really hard issue. It's a hard issue. Does it have a role in classification? Yes, it does, because classification is about the uses of the water and how to manage the uses in the area around that water. If PFAS is contributed by a use in that water, it should be part of the management. ANR should be imposing conditions on that, regardless of if it's a waste treatment facility or any other type of facility. If a source has been identified, ANR should be managing that source to prevent its further contribution to the water, which they have done it at the landfill, and which the landfill is trying to do even further. But you know, there are other sources, not just in the Northeast Kingdom, but elsewhere.
Representative Austin and then Labor.
I guess I think you just answered, you know, how does the standard? It's very concerning to me. We don't have the standard, and it's hard for me to imagine there's not some flexibility in creating a standard and reviewing it every year to update it for new sources of PFAS. You know, it's very concerning that we don't have a standard for this.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, I guess go ahead, Representative Labor.
Thank you, Chair. Town of Morgan is listed as a municipal water supply because of our school. And we just got a DEC report on the same thing this last month. For the 6 different TFOs. The current TMDL is 10. Actually true. Our town scored 7.6. For PFO, excuse me. The current DEC standard is 4, and we were 3.3. We're very happy about that, obviously. But so for drinking water standards, there is a level set. But I have been to Casella several times with several reps. They're doing a yeoman's job of trying to extract the PFOA compounds, spending many large 7-figure dollars in the process. Some of that is, and they're not against experimental. This is not an assault on Casella. This is to become aware of what we are dealing with surface waters, because we currently do not know. And we do know that we have 185,000 people north of us who depend upon that water for their drinking source. We have an international responsibility, not just a Vermont responsibility. And that's the only reason that those 2 compounds are listed in this bill. knowledge.
Okay. Further thoughts, Representative North?
I guess I'd also just note, thank you, Madam Chair, note that number 4, the very beginning of it just says, evaluate whether the existing water classification system in the state either, basically is sufficient. So it's not like we're asking the study group to come up with a standard or even recommend a standard. Just tell us, is what's currently there sufficient? And make sure you, oh, by the way, make sure you now include this PFAS and whether or not it's sufficient in addressing. Their answer might just be, nope, it's not sufficient. And that's a recommendation. You guys give it back to us to deal with it.
Yeah.
Make it sufficient.
Representative, maybe.
Thank you. It seems to me that we're in a no-win situation either way. I would like to know what the levels are. I don't want the study group to be completely put off target by potentially just looking for PFOAs, PFOS. But I think it would be a good idea to know, like Representative Labor said, where do we stand? What is it for surface waters? For that reason, I'm for the amendment for the testing. But I'm also for the idea that the 2 additional groups that would be included, they're also very aware about PFAS issues, and hopefully they will bring it up. That's why I say it doesn't look like we're in for me, it's a no-win because we want to know, but I hear that this kind of, well, do we really want to know?
Live with the answer.
And could this be the catalyst for getting the surface water standard that we've been looking for so many years?
So this, I don't think this takes away from what you just said. And I appreciate what you just, but this isn't going, we're not going to do, there's no testing that's going to be a result of this study. Just a
This is just
point of
to
clarification. This is just looking at what
point us in a direction of where to go.
we're just evaluating whether the classification system, like Representative North just read, is the regulatory framework adequate? If not, what gaps are there? Okay, I mean, I guess I'm actually thinking also about, I mean, there's PFAS in our mountain streams and ponds too. It's not just from leachate from landfills. So I guess that's like, I got into the very specific language I'm still struggling with. I think it's a good idea to draw attention perhaps to this really. Obviously, we know these are, we call them emerging chemicals of concern, but they've been emerging for a while, and council reminds us that they continue to emerge, and that's part of why we don't have a standard. We're going to be potentially overwhelmed by it. Okay. Any other final comments, thoughts? Representative Morris, do you have a question? We know that you didn't get the email.
Apparently not. I apologize.
I'm happy to help you catch up if you have questions or.
No, I think I understand where we are. I don't have any pressing questions at the moment. It's not the first time we've heard similar endeavors or whatever to try to understand the PFAS and that's dumping into the lake or into our streams, not just the one place, but like you mentioned, around the state.
Yes, I am struggling a little with the specificity of from waste treatment facilities in the state and ignoring other sources of potential that could come from anywhere from rainwater to other industrial discharges.
I don't know. Page, I don't know whether this would be worthwhile, but would it help if we removed waste treatment facilities? Would that make this amendment more to your liking, but still include the issue of PFAS?
That would help me, particularly because I do think there's other sources of PFAS getting into our waters.
And as Representative Labor said, and just wanted to be on record, this is not an assault on the South. I know the work that they're doing, I've been through several times as well.
So if you're moving away from the specificity on waste treatment facilities, I wouldn't say leaching of chemicals. I would just say from the contribution of chemicals,
Yeah, thank you.
because there are sorts of leachate.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and do we want to limit it to lakes and ponds? Why wouldn't it just be all surface waters like that, the rest of it? Is that okay with you, Representative Page? Or so yes, we're interested in fine tuning this a little and accepting your, I think I'm hearing the members leaning towards accepting drawing attention to PFAS and its threats. I think that's a very legit concern that we all share. But then also making sure that we're addressing it broadly, like we do for all of the other parameters that feed into our water quality standards.
That would be acceptable to me.
Okay. So would you be willing to offer a substitute amendment, or do you want us to offer that? We can offer it. I mean, it's up to you. Really up to you. If you wanted to stay in your name.
Whatever is the easiest way to solve this, I'm good.
Okay. Well, we can work that out. But do you have a question, Michael?
I think you're saying you want a fifth subdivision?
No,
That's the thing.
no, what's that? I think we're just saying we're gonna edit this one.
Okay,
So a new amendment to 4 with the changes we proposed, unless I'm wondering why you're asking that question.
well, 4 is focused on lakes and ponds, and then you just said. you
Oh,
wanted to
right,
be-
I see. Underlying was like. Yes.
Isn't the entire classification system oriented around lakes and ponds? Or is that not true? I don't know. So I'm not-
No. Certainly other, like rivers that's actually, so the challenge, that's the reason we've called out lakes and ponds in this study group is because they are lumped together and there's a kind of increasing awareness that perhaps they should be separate
Separate from
from each other, like that you might
lakes
have,
and ponds.
you might have
Different classes.
different standards. You might have different standards for
Lakes
lakes.
versus ponds or lakes and ponds together versus rivers and streams.
Yes,
The latter. Okay,
that's what some states do.
gotcha.
You don't treat a river like a lake. You have to look at the, depth of the lake, how that affects the water quality, how it affects clarity, turbidity, eutrophication, and then how that affects the uses around the lake.
So actually, maybe the PFAS should go under 3. And then
That's it.
And then leave 4 alone. Because then you would already have the PFAS in there. And then 4 would remain focused on lakes and ponds.
3 is Class A specific.
Yeah.
So I think if you were gonna look at,
I was worried about sprawl. Mission creep.
that's why I was thinking of a new subdivision 5, where it's evaluate how the state can manage emerging chemicals such as PFAS in a way to, way consistent with the state's water quality standards and the anti-degradation and implementation policy.
like a PhD representative, Zakowitz,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
just
It's big.
was gonna ask about how much that would actually expand the scope.
Yeah.
That sounds like a lot, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, then maybe into where it says including an evaluation of state and federal statutory and regulatory requirements and the identification of any legal administrative policy. Practical barriers to full compliance. Contribution of emerging chemicals to the state's surface waters.
Yeah. You try that. Maybe what we'll do is have Representative Hoyt use the amendment. You're the presenter of the bill. Representative Page.
Yes, Madam Chair. So I believe I will retract my second amendment so that you can provide your own amendment based upon our conversation here.
Okay. And if you don't mind, would you mind if we do that on third reading?
In your hands, Chair.
Great. So, can we do a stroke, are you good?
Good.
So the plan would be, I think, today to accept amendment, adding the 2 members to the work group. And then Representative Page withdraws his second amendment, acknowledging that we're working on further amendment that would include that for third reading. Okay. People okay with that? Representative Logan?
I'm okay with that.
Right, all right, so all those in favor of that plan moving forward, raise your hand. All right, I'm seeing everyone in the room saying yes, and Representative Chapin, you're joining by Zoom. I don't know if you're driving, might be. We'll catch up with Representative Chapin afterwards. Okay, thank you all for this good discussion. We will adjourn in the morning and head to the floor so that Mike can present this bill. All right.